All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started here. I know the coffee break is continuing, but I just want to take a moment to give a warm Brazilian welcome to Al and his team, Oscar, Kezia. So can we do that right now? Just thank them for bringing CJI again to Brazil. So as an American Brazilian or a Brazilian American, I get asked a lot about Brazil in my day-to-day. In fact, I've been known as somewhat of a cultural translator. Maybe I should add that on my LinkedIn. People are always asking me questions about Brazil, like what's it like, and does everybody like samba? No. Are all the men supermodels? No. There's a lot of questions about Brazil and misconceptions about Brazil. And aviation is no stranger to that. People have a lot of misconceptions about Brazil as a country in terms of aviation. And I just want to give you a couple of statistics before we get started here. If you take the Brazilian business jet population of just over 900 aircraft, that's the largest number of business jets by country in the world. Now, it's a distant second from the United States at 14,000 some jets, but that's still something that's noteworthy. If you take the Brazilian and the Mexico population of business jets, which totals about 1,800 aircraft, that's more than Canada, the UK, Germany, Malta, and Australia combined, just to give you an example of the scale. So for you Brazilians, you should feel good about that. There's a strong market here. I would say it's a maturing market, but at the same time, it's a market that's worth bringing a CJI to, certainly, and it's also worth investing in for those who have North American or European countries. You have a good reason to be here. So that kind of leads us into our topic here of financing business aircraft. As you know, aircraft don't run on jet fuel. They run on cash. Or as our friends up here would say, they run on financing. It takes money to move aircraft. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about the business environment, what are some of the drivers in the financing sector. And I think it's going to be a great chance for us to update ourselves from these two distinguished gentlemen. We have Marcelo Goldberg from JP Morgan. We also have Chris Lee from First Source Bank. These gentlemen are seasoned veterans, accomplished in this area of financing. We're very fortunate to have them here today. I'm not going to bother you with going through their bios. You can look at that on the website for CJI, but trust me that these gentlemen know what they're talking about. So we're very privileged to have them here. So thank you, folks, for coming. Chris just arrived from the United States. His flight got delayed, but he just landed, and he's here with us, so we're very grateful for that. And Marcelo, you're welcome here as well. So we'll begin our discussion here on the couch here. So, gentlemen, I want to ask you just to take us back maybe 7 or 8 years. Take us back to that period before COVID. Tell us a little bit about the environment then, and then also during COVID, and then where we are now. Just kind of give us some context so we can have this discussion on kind of where things have been. So, Marcelo.
All right. Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. Well, yeah, COVID, I think we talk in other panels here, but COVID changed a lot of things, and they are here to stay, right? Before COVID, we had the environment of very low rates, and actually, we had some demand for aircraft financing. We always had that, but COVID really changed the whole game. You know, we saw the wealthy clients, the ultra high net worth individuals that usually would take a flight, a first class flight. They were like, okay, now I need my own airplane. There was less mobility. They couldn't leave the country. Some countries had restrictions to come in and out. We even had a case of a client that lives in Northeast Brazil, and he always tells us, look, to buy an aircraft it's a waste of money. I can get the best flight to anywhere in the world, and I can fly first class. But he lives in the north part of Brazil. Now to go to Portugal, that's the place that he loves, he needs to take a flight to São Paulo and then go back to Europe. So he needs two legs. Before he had direct flights everywhere from his city, he no longer has that. So he decided to buy an aircraft. Why I'm saying this? So in my opinion, when that hits the market, there's that higher demand. We have several players of the industry here. You know that things doesn't come like by magic. To assemble an airplane take years. You have all the parts and everything that goes on. So we saw the demand. There was a bottleneck of production, and this thing is still on. Like, it's getting better, but that's where the price of the aircraft went up. It became a much more expensive asset than it was before, and we saw this higher demand going through now. So what about you, Chris? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, David. Thank you, Al. As I was traveling here today with all the delays, I remember something I learned years ago as a term called tranquilo. I was thinking, tranquilo, tranquilo. But I needed private aviation to get here practically today. Going back to 1998, it was the first time I came to Brazil with Cessna Finance, and I got to meet Rui Aquino with Tam at the time. And so I have a background going back to 98, and our bank has had a background in Brazil going back to 1996. So if I'll back up a little bit, I'll just say that it's been fascinating to watch the country and the evolution of general aviation in Brazil continue to evolve. I think it's, if you look at statistics, you'll see that there's a case to be made that Brazil is outpacing the US as far as the percentage of new aircraft that will be coming in the next 5 years. The US has had an average new turnover rate of under 2.4%, and Brazil's looking to be stronger than that. And so I think that's an exciting thing. But going back to pre-COVID, we saw a lot of price stability. There was a kind of an expectation in the market that there would be a certain 7% a year depreciation on average for the first few years, and during COVID that was wiped away. We saw negative depreciation, which is a term I never thought I'd say, because we saw assets that were appreciating. And so for the people that were financing their aircraft using a straight loan or even a finance lease where they're the owner of the aircraft, they were realizing great benefits to owning the asset versus those that were utilizing operating leases. So we've seen that start to come back now as it tracks along with other metrics like macroeconomic metrics like the Brazilian currency exchange rate. It was weaker 2 or 3 years ago than it is today, and it looks like it will continue to get stronger against the US dollar. I think that's going to be a positive for them as they continue to import. The Brazilian reais will get stronger, it looks like. So we're excited to see how that goes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about interest rates, Marcelo. This is a question I think you can comment on. Do interest rates dictate domestic or foreign finance? Help us understand that a little bit.
Yeah, usually the Brazilian client has several options to finance their aircraft, right? They have the international players like me, like Chris. They also have the local players. The local players, usually they work with the local rate, the CDI. And when he goes international, he gets the SOFR, which is the new LIBOR, to finance the dollar rates. What's the main difference? The CDI is much higher than the SOFR rate. So probably like if you're going to finance an aircraft here, CDI plus 2, 3, it's going to be like 15% per year of interest. When you go to international players, you're going to pay SOFR plus 2, SOFR plus 3, which is 6 to 7% per year. So the clients are aware of that, and they are always looking and making their math on rates. Like when the difference is very high, we see a higher demand for dollar loans. They want to do dollar loans. When the difference is less, they are less sensitive to it. Lately, as a financial advisor, what we try to do with our clients, always try to match the assets and liabilities, right? We saw in other panels here, aircraft, they are dollar-based assets, right? So if you have an aircraft, you can sell it in dollars at any time. So it's okay to borrow in dollars to finance an aircraft. We feel okay with that. There will be the currency variation, but the loan will be varying and the asset as well. For clients that want to use the CDI, the local rate, it's fine as well as long as they have the income, right? They produce income in Brazil, they borrow, they have the loan in reais. What we saw lately on interest rates, which is a bit curious, and we don't advocate for, is when they want to borrow in Swiss francs or Japanese yens, because the lower is much less, the rate is much lower than the dollar. They think they're making a buck by the currency arbitrage, but then they're putting an element of FX risk that we don't like as fiduciary advisors of the clients. Right, Chris?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The less arbitrage, the better for us. We prefer dollar-denominated debt with our clients, and many of our clients prefer dollar-denominated debt as well. In fact, we typically will open cash accounts, or checking accounts, deposit accounts that are in U.S. dollars. But the arbitrage thing, we stopped getting interest in that with two or more countries involved about 3 or 4 years ago, and so it's much less popular now.
What about currency? You see currency fluctuations. In fact, when the Plano Real was introduced, it was 1-to-1 with the dollar. Now it's mid-5s up to 6, so it's kind of hovering in that. Talk to us a little bit about the currency. How does that affect things? Does the currency matter?
Yeah, you're talking about the real. I remember when I moved to the U.S. from São Paulo to the U.S., the real was 170, and now it's like almost 6. But we didn't see this affecting the demand in the end, because again, it's a dollar asset. The clients that want to purchase an aircraft and finance it, they are wealthy by definition. So we didn't see the currency depreciated, there's less demand for aircraft loans. We saw this as FX neutral, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, same. We typically would see a client that produces goods in this country prefer to use the reais, but what happens is most of our clients have businesses that are very well established internationally in other countries, and so they're used to the currency risks, and they take that with the U.S. dollar.
Okay. What about, we remember back in the 2008 crisis, repossessions, reclaiming of assets was something that was really a point of crisis for lenders. What's that like now, and how has it been over the last few years? I imagine it's quite a bit less, but how can you make that more simple of a process? How can the reclaiming of assets become simplified, if that's possible?
You want to start? I want Chris to start this one.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's go back in time. In the last almost 30 years, First Source Bank has only had to repossess 2 airplanes. And so we found great opportunity here, great clients, great success. We want to do more. The repossession process for us is never something that we want to ever really get into. So as soon as there's a sign of any kind of issue or opportunity, we want to work with the client and try to prevent a repossession. We may extend terms, we may forgive, we may do a lot of creative things to prevent the repossession. If that's something that has to happen, I can get into that. There's a lot of steps to it, but I'll let Marcelo.
So what you're saying is that you're very proactive in that sense to prevent it from happening in the first place, and usually by working with the owner of the aircraft, you can head that off at the pass. You can try to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, as a relationship bank, it's incumbent upon us to have the knowledge of our client to where we're aware of an issue. A lot of times we'll see it in something like a payment of an engine program. During the closing process, we get an assignment of the engine program, so we'll be notified at the same time our client will be notified of a non-payment. Right. So even if the client didn't tell us there was an issue, we can see it in things like the lack of use of the airplane if it hasn't flown in a while, or if they stop paying for the engine program. There's signs that we can read. But yeah, it's our preference to go forward and have an upfront conversation with the client to try to head off the repossession. But one of the things that's great about Brazil that's not the case in some of the other countries that we finance in is that it's a Cape Town Convention country. And the rule of law is strong here in Brazil, and we like that a lot.
Marcelo?
Yeah, I agree, Chris. I think, first of all, the underwriting of the risk is fundamental to make sure that the client has the capacity to service the debt. And the monitoring, as you mentioned, you're monitoring and managing the relationship, right? I don't recall an aircraft that we repossessed, but we had events of default, we had events of broken covenants in the contract, and we work with the client to restructure. The worst thing is to go to a repossession. It's costly for the bank, it's costly for the client. But about the environment to recoup assets, and about, you mentioned about Cape Town Convention. Because we didn't have many repossessions, we had to do a lengthy study at JP Morgan on, does this work? Does Cape Town Convention actually works, right? Because this is what matters in the end for us. And we discovered that yes, it works with some caveats. So, and I think it's worthy to explore here. So we have Cape Town Convention. The country goes and sign up on this, right? But idiosyncrasies and specificities on the local law enforcement, they do dictate if you're going to be able to reclaim or not. Brazil had 2 or 3 very positive cases, one very recent that we saw the Cape Town Convention spirit being respected and giving rights to the creditors. We saw also in Colombia, we studied Colombia, and there were cases that the Cape Town Convention worked. There's one case that is public, actually. In 2013, Tango 01, which is the aircraft of the Argentina presidential aircraft of Argentina, it was under discussion if they would be recaptured, reclaimed to cover the external debt of the country. And there was a way that local, I don't have all the details here, but there was a way that they were able to protect the aircraft. So we as a lender, we were like, okay, so maybe in this jurisdiction, it will be very hard to recoup. There was some situation in Mexico as well where we saw. So we are always engaging with our lawyers. I'm sorry. Situation in Mexico where we saw it was harder. So Cape Town Convention works well, but you need to be very careful as a lender in the jurisdiction where you are, the flag of the aircraft, because you may be in dire straits if you don't do that. So, but we work together with our lawyers to make sure that we are working the right flags, right jurisdictions, and so on.
Yeah, and I'll add one thing too, and that is, I think we're going to hear tariffs on every panel, so I'm sorry about this, but the tariffs that we're looking at right now may also affect repossession interest. So you mentioned the size of the U.S. market being roughly 14,000 versus Brazil's roughly 1,000. So it wouldn't be a bad thing or untypical for us to repossess an aircraft in a foreign country and then repatriate it back to the U.S. market for sale. That's changing now. You know, what are the economics? We have to look at all the specificities on whether or not it makes financial sense to export the aircraft out of Brazil, bring it back to the U.S., or if we remarket it here in Brazil. So right now, you know, if we were to go through a repossession process, we would look more heavily to remarket locally and work with partners like Synerjet and others to find a home for the aircraft here.
Okay, real good. For the audience, make sure you submit your questions via Slido. If you got any questions for these gentlemen, this is your chance. So please don't forget to do that. A couple of other questions here. So, you know, part of what's happening in Brazil is just the professionalization of aviation. We're seeing that in a lot of areas, you know, safety, operations. We're also seeing, you know, an area that affects you in terms of, you know, aircraft valuations becoming more accepted and having, you know, professional appraisers certified in Brazil. I spoke to one just today. So how does that help you to have, you know, groups like certified appraisers based in Brazil who can go out and, you know, either initially evaluate the value of the aircraft or periodically evaluate the value of an aircraft. How does that, do you do yearly checkups on the aircraft to make sure that they're still within your expectations? How does that work from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, we do an appraisal at the beginning to establish the value of the aircraft and loan to value, and then we do a yearly checkup. The higher number of appraisers and professionals here locally help us a lot because we are all professionals of this place of aircraft here. The demand and the time to close a transaction is fundamental. And the client comes and says, look, I need to put an offer at this plane right now. I say, I need to evaluate it. I need to appraise it. So it's very good to know and to be sure that we will have an appraisal handy when the client has an urgency.
Yeah, we're very similar. We'll take a look at the aircraft very closely at the purchase side, but then we'll probably not audit it for either the first year or second. It depends. We may go every 2 years. What we like to do is keep track of the financials of the client and the aircraft movement and engine programs. Those are more telling. If we have questions or we're not getting answers, then we'll send a local appraiser out. But the local appraisers here, in my opinion, have exceeded the quality of the stuff that we get even in the U.S.
Fantastic. Well, your comment there, Chris, ties in with one of the questions we got here. Explain how it works in Brazil. The need of engine program when financing an aircraft, we don't see it as a requirement here as compared to other countries. So even though it's not required here, it obviously benefits an operator and it benefits you to have that aircraft covered by, or those engines covered by an engine program. Can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, we break out aircraft into different segments, so not all aircraft typically will have an engine program. It's getting more popular now for the turboprop market, for example. In the U.S., we're seeing more single-engine turboprop, PC-12s, TBMs. They're starting to get on programs. We haven't seen that in the last 5 years, but we're starting to see that now. So here in Brazil, we don't really see a lot of turboprops on engine programs. On the light jets, mid-sized jets, super mids, it's very common to have it, and many banks will require it. Our bank will look at it on an individual basis. So if the client has enough into the aircraft as a down payment, it can offset the buy-in of the engine program, and we would be okay not having the engine program in that case.
Okay. Marcelo, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're more flexible than me, Chris, on this. No, we have a general program for our clients of the international space, seen from the U.S., right? And yes, we require an engine program. We had working with Brazil, we had several clients that pushed back on this requirement. They say, look, we don't see exactly this. We don't see this as required as you're mentioning. But usually we are able to convince the client that we have a product, but we need this, and this brings benefits to the client in terms of having an engine program. There was a funny story, a client of ours, he was like, no, I don't need an engine program. I trust on my own maintenance and stuff. And I said, look, you probably wouldn't board on a car to get a trip from São Paulo to Rio in a car that you don't have a proper engine checked, right? Like you do all the reviews on your car yearly to travel around. Why don't you do the same at the plane? And he laughed, and he ended up closing with us. But I see this question, but for now, we're still required.
So obviously, aircraft increased in value, especially since COVID. Some aircraft doubled in value, and now we've seen a pretty good increase in interest rates. How does cash compete with what you're offering? Do you see your primary competitors as other financiers, or is your main competitor always going to be cash?
So our main competitor currently is cash, and Marcelo and I actually don't even compete for deals. We get our deals from different sources, so it's very comfortable to be on stage with you and talk about this. But we compete mostly on cash, and we see the time frame of the closings being very paramount to the use of the finance company. So one thing that we like to do is try to excel at the speed at which we can transact a closing, and that's something that I'm very proud of. We're very quick to close a deal, and that really helps somebody utilize financing versus cash. But to your point, when you mentioned the increase in values, if you've got the aircraft under an operating lease, you don't really own the aircraft, and so you're missing out on that appreciation. And we've seen our clients who have not been utilizing operating leases, they've been using either a finance lease, or which is basically a disguised loan. Those are the ones that have been benefiting from the increase in the price. So.
Excellent. We got another question here. How do maintenance programs, engines, and airframe affect interest rates? Do they affect interest rates, or are they more reflective of interest rates?
Yeah. No, I will respond in a more generic way. Whenever we see an issue, a known big issue, but some thing in the aircraft, in the appraisal, or he doesn't want to have some sort of engine or on the airframe, whatever is different from the standard, we have to allocate more capital. It's considered a higher risk transaction because the collateral is not as within the standard parameters, and we have to reserve more capital. This can increase the rates to 1% spread, right? So the spread will be SOFR plus 2.5. Now it's going to be SOFR plus 3.5. When you put this in a $20 million aircraft, it's a lot of money. So yeah, you can bump up the spread if you're not with our common standard.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about the risk for both the client and the finance company. So if you didn't have a maintenance program, it might want you might want to think about the risk being higher for remarketing the airplane if you had to do a repossession or buy into an engine program. But there's other ways you can affect that too. You can be creative with the structure of it. Maybe you shorten the term or do a full payout. Those can lower risk as well and keep the rate the same.
What about aircraft size and also age? How do those two things affect financing decisions? Talk a little bit about that, because you can have a small new aircraft, or you can have a large older aircraft. So it's not always just the size of the aircraft that matters, is it? You got age, you got value, you've got engine programs. How does that figure into your rationale for a decision?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually we try to work with aircrafts over $10 million in value, used or new. This is usually our niche. We don't like to work with aircrafts whose in the maturity of the loan will be over 20 years of age, right? We usually don't like that. So the aircrafts we lend against usually are over $10 million in value, in appraisal value, and up to 15 years of age. So by the end of the tenor of the loan, or 13 years of age, it will be 20-year-old aircraft.
And for us, our sweet spot's going to be somewhere between 2 million and all the way up to about 25-ish, 28 million. And the age limit, we don't really have a hard age limit. Like many banks will say 20 years or 15. We don't have that. We do prefer newer if we can get it, but only if it's important to the aircraft. So we talk about the size. There are Falcons that we really like to finance that have C-checks. And C-checks can be a 7-figure maintenance expense. So if you look at a full payout loan on an old Falcon, if you're accomplishing a $200,000 to $250,000 a year recapture of the loan value, then you're lowering your risk if you had to take it back and still incur a C-check. So we just have to structure the deal right for that specific client and the specific airplane for it to make sense. We wouldn't want to be offering 90% money on an aircraft that was on like an older Falcon that was coming up on a C-check next year, and we didn't have a low 7-figure reserve.
Understand. I think you've answered this question here already, so we'll consider that one answered. As our time is wrapping up, Marcelo and then Chris, just maybe give us some final thoughts. What is a Brazilian buyer? What should they be thinking about when they're approaching a lender? What are some words of advice you could give them if they're a first-time buyer or a repeat buyer? What are some parting words that you could give to a Brazilian buyer for an aircraft?
No, I would say that the Brazilian market is very well served in terms of lenders. Please, the first thing I say always, make sure you really need the aircraft, that you have the capacity. do your homework in terms of gathering everything for your underwriting process, because the market is very liquid and you may lose aircraft if you don't have everything organized. That's the first thing. The second is about structure. You're going to get a lease, a local lease. You're going to get a external financing. It's going to be in a holding company. It's going to be in your operating company. Some states in Brazil, people prefer to put on their own name, the aircraft, especially in the agro sector. So it's make sure you have the finance ready. Make sure you have the right structure, and have a good tax advisor. The bank doesn't give tax advice, JP Morgan doesn't give tax advice, but have a good tax advisor to make sure you can get the best of your buck.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and I would also add that even though we're seeing a slight increase in the amount of inventory available for sale in the post-COVID era, the percentage of aircraft that are really worth owning is still very low. So where we used to see in the COVID era, we might see a 3% available for sale as kind of a typical, very low amount. Now we're seeing 6, 7, 8% available for sale, but the aircraft that we are wanting to finance and our clients are still interested in is still below 4%. So we would echo what Marcelo said and encourage a client to get pre-approved so that we have that understanding going into an LOI, so the client can go out and get something that is a good airplane, a good example of one, and beat somebody else that is getting financing and is taking their time with getting approved.
Fantastic. Well, we're just about out of time here. Marcelo, real quick, who can finance an aircraft with JP Morgan? Do you finance external customers, or does somebody have to become a customer first of JP Morgan?
It needs to first become our customer to open an account with us. The client needs to have $5 million deposit invested with us, and then we can engage with in the aircraft finance.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate this. Folks, don't forget that First Source is a sponsor of CJI, so be sure to thank them in your coffee breaks and such. But appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you, gentlemen, and really appreciate you having up here on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.